I think there is, it's weird to say, especially if you come from a position of faith. You don't expect, or I don't know what you expect, but you know, my, even if I speak from a position of faith, the answer would be, these biblical images, your Judeo-Christian mythos or tradition, there's it's a huge place of like contradictions, of opposites, of like, pain and power and abuse, and also love and romance and, longing. And I think, on a really fairly fundamental level, I think that's what's attractive, as an image, as a corpus of images and ideas to draw from that. Um, and you know the fun, I guess, or the compulsion from a creative point of view of using that is, how do you, I guess, hold the slight paradox of these two things coexisting and, coming together to, in a perhaps a murky way, speak to something that feels true, right? I don't think we need really even to use the word is true, but like that it speaks to like a moment. It speaks to, some sort of like thought tradition. It speaks to like, the value of, I guess, human ritual of the scenarios we find ourselves in again and again and again. Yeah. So I think, yeah, on a basic level, I think that's probably it. I mean, I don't know. I think that's kind of cool that you said that scathing. I mean, I guess what is intended is what is written. Whatever, death of the author, etc., etc. That is actually something that I have in the back of the head a lot. It's not something that the reader needs to get. Receive it however you will. But I think the feeling of like, having a little bit of acid here and there, or like, like just squeezing a bit of like lemon in the middle of the simmering broth, or like, what you call scathing, or like bite, right? I think all of that I class under, or even the sonnet idea of a volta, like, a bit of a twist, a bit of a turn, coming from left field, something that just like, rapidly joins the stream and, suddenly forces itself to become a part of the overall idea or rhythm of the poem. That is important to me. I think multiple ways to think about it. One way is, poem is a conversation between competing selves, competing approaches, competing views. Obviously, it can be an engagement, right? Like if it's a foreign voice, like, mocking mine, I see that as, in a sense, you don't want the work to, I guess, be like a glamour exercise or like a vanity exercise. So, it's in a way inviting like one version of a reader and having that be, part of like, the poem. So if we go back to like, what we were talking about previously with like, these like biblical like images, I think it's equally important to like mine them as it is to like, mock them, or to mock a poet who would use that after like, however many thousand years. Like, why, like we could move on, we could go and involve like a multiplicity of like traditions. So if you stick to like one imagistic tradition, and if it happens to be that incredibly widely used, semi-Western associated, pool of like, Judeo-Christian images, then I think we should have fun with it. And I think, mocking the self a little bit, like, mocking the, in a sense, antiquated instinct to hew to these things, I think that's hopefully what makes the poem, in some sense, speaking from where we are today. I guess extensions of the dualities and like opposites and like, polarities that we've been talking of, like not so much like I don't really think, I think that's, something for other fields to handle if you use the word reconcile, but I think apprehend, play, right? Laugh perhaps in a pretty dry, slightly, dark manner, perhaps. I don't, I'll leave it to other people to decide what words they want to use in response to the way I approach these ideas. But I think I mean, I think if you look at the poems that are already out there, I guess there is there's a undercurrent of like, you know, trying to, I suppose, find or to hold just for a short while, you know, let it slip through your fingers, but at least for a short while to hold like value, to hold beauty, right? Or to at least hold that 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 illusion of like value and goodness, right? Even if you kind of have a feeling, I'm not really quite holding the thing, but at least to embrace the feeling of like, you know, what is it like to pretend or to believe authentically for a while that like, you know, we're really in the presence of this good, beautiful thing. So I think and whenever like someone writes about that, I guess it comes from a place of like fear. I would love for myself, I would use the word like cowardice, right? You know, like, you know, I guess death kind of fits in and out quite a bit in the work so far, right? You know, whether it's like death in a personal sense or whether it's like, you know, death ideas or like death of segments of society or things that were never alive to begin with, but we lived on the assumption that they were and we wanted these virtues to be true so badly. So realizing that they weren't, you know, if we talk about capitalism, we talk about, you know, social justice, you know, or some political themes, I think that grappling with that, you know, that's the death part, that's the grief. I suppose moving forward, I'll probably deal with something to do with the idea of like fear, um, and but with the same goal of like attempting to like hold value and hold beauty and trying to cling to that quite insistently in spite of like, you know, not so much the grief now, but like, you know, the fear that remains. Or cowardice in my case, because I would, you know, speak of death, I would like to live forever. I would take the vampire bargain in an instant and like, it's okay, you know, the sun is something that can be given up. So that's, I think that's cowardice, right? You know, if we talk about that literary tradition, you know, I think one way I propose to think about these ideas of immortality is cowardice, is fear. And I think that will be really cool to explore that. I think it's already in shades in the work that's out there. One of the things about some of the poems, I guess, is, and I mean, you know, I'm no academic, but if we want to like try to put on that hat and like, you know, I'm trying to like, you know, on a meta level analyze what my work is. And once again, I think the fun of this platform is that, you know, like I'm not speaking from a place of research. So hopefully the researchers, if it ever comes to that, you know, can have a look at laugh, or if students bump into this, you know, and they're doing some random tests that were signed by some random tutor who ran out of poems and just chucked mine in, you know, hopefully it brings them a bit of a laugh, you know, and they can take the piss a little bit in what I'm saying. So I think I would say that, you know, on a formal level, on a theme level, I think when it comes to voice, I would use a word like oracular. So like, you know, in the poem that you know, I got to read, augury, and like a couple of other poems in the book and in journals, etc. I guess it's that there is maybe, I would hope there is a bit of a declarative element, kind of like, you know, a soothsayer, like, you know, fortune teller, you know, somewhere in the booth in like Little India or Chinatown, you know, kind of like making these assertions, and sometimes occasionally if you get careless or they want to take a risk, even aspersions, you know, at the reader. And that's where the idea of like, you know, bite of acid comes in, you know, a little bit of a sense of danger, and then, you know, other things to do with like, you know, something that's mythical sounding, something that has an element of like, you know, fantasy, or even the references to like, you know, culture, like gaming culture, or like video gamey bits. All of that I think I use because the goal is to make something sound like, you know, uh, uh, like a veneer of like, you know, grandeur or fantasy, to kind of like, you know, mask, I guess, a real danger, a real pettiness, a real you know, sense of like, you know, feelings and place and injustice that are housed in artifacts, that are housed in places. But I think when you put that declarative, like oracle-like, fantasy-like veneer over it in the language, I guess the hope is to, you know, if nothing else, I guess, speak and to, you know, honor the tradition that all this has to some degree been walked through before. And I don't know if there's value to that, but, you know, at the very least, you know, it is a document, I suppose.